Without any further ado, I'm going to introduce our speakers today. And we are so pleased that we're able to continue and have a second in our series on banking in Boone County. The bank that we're going to be discussing today is the Citizens Deposit Bank. And we have with us some very important people. Sue Rudicil will begin the presentation. She is literally a wealth of information. She started out with the Citizens Deposit Bank in January of 1964. She was the bookkeeper, and there's no more important position in the bank than the bookkeeper, let me tell you. Then she was promoted to cashier. She served on the board. The Citizens Deposit Bank became Boone State Bank. Many of you remember that in 1971. And Sue served as auditor for 15 years and as a member of the board of directors, and then she became secretary to the board of directors. That bank was acquired by Fifth Third, and she became branch manager of the Fifth Third Boone County office. And then it became Bank of Kentucky, the Bank of Kentucky that we know today and know and love and trust that bank. And she is still a member of the board of that bank. She's been very active with the Dinsmore homestead over the years, she and her entire family. And of course, as you all remember, if you're a friend of Hannah Baird, you got involved in Dinsmore. She has 4 daughters, 3 survive, and I knew Susan and Sandra because of their work with Dinsmore as well. And then I haven't had the opportunity to meet Paula yet, but I hope to soon.
You probably have, you just didn't know.
That may be. That's right. And then she's got 12 grandchildren, and get this, 2.5 great-grandchildren. Now, where do they have? Because one of her granddaughters is expecting a tiny little one. The family owns Belleview Sand and Gravel, and so we know them from that aspect as well, running a business in Boone County. So they are just steeped in Boone County, as are our other 2 guests that will be speaking after Sue. Dennis Ridge, he came to Boone State Bank in 1973. He was first with First National in Covington. And Dennis is now retired. He retired about 3.5 years ago, I think, or whenever it was. That's right. Okay. And he became, after he left Boone State, he went to the Bank of Williamstown and was president of that. So he also is a wealth of knowledge of banking in Boone County. And then Sandy Rouse, she started out with the bank a good many years ago, but then took another direction. That's right. She lives here in Florence. She has 2 children, but no grandchildren. But we'll hope to know more about each one of these wonderful people as they proceed with their presentation. And so, without any further ado, I give you Sue Rudicil.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to make one correction. Is this on?
Yes.
Okay. I'd like to make one correction. When I retired from Fifth Third, Boone County, that was the end of that connection with Fifth Third, and then Bank of Kentucky started out as Bank of Boone County, and that was a new charter, and that was in 1991. And of course, that was started with people probably that everyone knows that are in northern Kentucky area, Bob Zapp and R.C. Durr, Biscayne, just to name a few. But anyway, that is a different bank. So I'd like to thank Betsy and Steve for inviting all of us here tonight. And I'd also like to thank Sandy Rouse. She's a long time friend, and she has been the one to help in this collaboration of the two banks. We couldn't have done it without her, number one. I told Steve, anyone that knows me realizes I'd rather sing something than to get up and speak publicly, but I don't know a tune to this, so I just have to say it. After doing this, I decided that memory recall is a real exercise, and there are two important lessons to pass on to my grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Number one, ask your parents, your grandparents, and all your neighbors all the questions that you can think of about their life and the community where you live, what has happened in their days, their early days there. And number two, as you live each day of your life, keep really good notes in a scrapbook about eventful happenings, because you think you're not going to forget things. Guess what? You forget a lot of things, especially, times. Even though they were very significant, you still forget times. So, that's what I'm going to certainly advise my grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Thank goodness for NKY Views and for the Boone County Recorder. And also, thank you all as the Boone County Historical Society for keeping history alive in Boone County. Now on to the Citizens Deposit Bank. Citizens Deposit Bank opened its doors for business on the 5th of April in 1909, and it was a frame building which was recorded in the 1930 historical edition of the Recorder, dated that though hardly a thing of beauty was adequate for all purposes and eliminated the necessity of spending any of the capital at the start for a banking house. The bank was organized to fill the need of this little river community because the nearest banking would have been in Rising Sun, which was across the river, or Petersburg, which at that time they had Farmers Bank, or at Burlington, 7 miles away, they had the old Boone County Bank and the People's Deposit Bank. Needless to say, back in those times, 7 miles of rough roads and a horse and buggy or crossing the river, especially when it was frozen, was quite an ordeal. The first president was James Rogers. He was my great-grandfather, with R.O. Ryle as vice president. The first cashier was Forrest Brown. And in addition, the following served on the board of directors. And these probably may be names that you recognize now that are still have family as residents of Boone County. John J. Walton, W.B. Arnold, R.B. Brown, M.J. Corbin, Jasper Sullivan, and Al Rogers. Initial stock was sold in the amount of $15,000. The deposits on opening day totaled a whole $2,706.25, which by 1930 had increased to $200,000, which was amazing. According to the Boone County Recorder in 1930, there were older banks in the county with larger capital stock, but there was none in greater proportion to assets than the Citizens Deposit Bank of Bellevue. Much of this huge increase could be attributed to the hiring of Charles Ernest McNeely in 1913. Mr. Ernest, as most everyone addressed him, he was a local boy. I think his family lived in Waterloo area at the time. He went off to Eastern Kentucky State School in 1909, and then to Wilbur Smith Comer Financial College, and that was at a part of the University of Kentucky in 1911. In 1912, he so desired to learn banking that he worked for nothing at Citizens Deposit Bank, and that he was 21 at the time. He was elected cashier the following year. The deposits increased substantially when he took office on May 2nd. He missed 1 year because of illness, but during World War I, he was very instrumental in overselling the bank's quota in both Liberty bonds and war savings stamps with a total of $75,000. Now, believe me, in the little town of Belleview, $75,000 was quite an accomplishment. The bank was awarded this citation from the Federal Reserve Bank on behalf of the government for this wonderful accomplishment. The old frame building had deteriorated so much so that in 1927 they decided to build a new home for the bank, and when it was completed, it would rival any building of its kind in the county, and it was quite an improvement over the old building, as well as a really nice asset to the town of Bellevue. The original frame building was used when I was in grade school at Bellevue as Loudon's Restaurant. I don't know if that rings a bell with anyone or not. And ultimately was moved to the river's edge and became a corn crib. So, by 1930, the Citizens Deposit Bank had a surplus of $15,000, which equaled the capital stock, and $11,000 in undivided profits, which was a really healthy condition for any bank, especially since that for a number of years the bank had paid a 6% semi-annual dividend to the stockholders. Boy, wouldn't we like to get that today? From the onset of the Depression and through the 30s, I wasn't able to find any history about the bank, but when the bank building changed hands in the 1980s, that's when Fifth Third had acquired Boone State. I was able to get my hands on an old minute book, and the minute book was dated December 3rd, 1938, and it went through January the 10th, 1950. Needless to say, the minutes were pretty abbreviated back then. By this time, the board composition changed. W.B. Rogers, which was my great uncle, was president. Henry Clore was vice president. John J. Maurer, which was my husband Bill's great uncle, was elected clerk. Mr. McNeely was still the bank's cashier, and he received a big amount of $150 a month. And his son was hired as assistant cashier. Other board members were Al Rogers, J.D. McNeely, R.S. Hensley, W.G. Kite, and John W. Rogers. The bank at this time was paying a 3% semi-annual dividend. So things had started going the other way. Certainly this was after the Depression, which was understandable, but still, that was a nice dividend, 6% a year. Interest on time deposits was 2 to 2.5% a year, which is more than we're getting today. So things sort of have a way of going around and around. The 11 years of minutes were pretty repetitious, and other than they had resolutions of condolences for the passing of board members, and those were John Maurer and W.G. Kite, and then Mr. McNeely's wife, Edna, passed away during that time span. Catherine Clore was hired in February of 1943 as assistant cashier for $1 a day. Mr. McNeely was still cashier, and he was making $150 a month still at this time. But he had a 2-week vacation, so things were improving. On December the 5th, 1947, they got a bonus. And that was a total for the 2 officers of $240. So they were really making big money. During the early 20th century, and at this time in history, it was a common practice for the same board members to serve on more than one bank board in the county. In the mid-1940s, C.F. Blankenbaker and Frank Conley, and I think you all would recognize the name of Mr. Blankenbaker. He was Francis Berkshire's father. They were both elected in the mid-40s to the Board of Citizens Deposit Bank. I could find no recorded attendance, but it was there every year that they had been elected to the board. Henry Clore was instrumental in forming the People's Deposit Bank in 1904, and he was a board member there. He was also an active board member at Citizens. It was apparent at that time in history that that influential men were more concerned about filling a need in the community than fearing competition, and I thought that was very commendable. There are probably several other names that you all might recognize. Steve said you recognized Blanche Beeman.
Yeah, she was my neighbor.
Yeah. There's, just names you wouldn't just think that you would have. There's people from Rising Sun, and I think there were people from Warsaw. I think Frank Conley, isn't that right, Sandy? I believe I remember he was from Warsaw. And, I don't know how, or I guess it was maybe friends related to friends.
Frank would have been son-in-law to R.B. Brown, who you had as one of the
Okay,
original directors.
that's what I assumed would happen, that would be relatives of other people there. By 1948, the dividends had increased to 7% per annum, as well as the bonuses to the officers. And times after the war were good. I wasn't able to get any information for the 1950s, but I do assume everything was going pretty well. On January the 4th, 1964, I was hired as a bookkeeper for the bank. I had had no previous experience. My salary was $1 per hour. Mr. Ernest McNeely still served as a cashier, as he had since 1913, and Catherine Clore was still assistant cashier. My job consisted of running the general ledger posting machine, and I don't know if anyone remembers what the posting machines looked like, but they looked about the size of a furnace in the middle of the office. And then Sandy she got to do that too, but that was my job. I wasn't allowed to operate the cash drawer, and that for 6 months, I guess I was in training for that. Needless to say, and I did cleaning. We all had to do cleaning, so I really probably came more proficient in cleaning banks than I did becoming a teller at the time. Mr. Ernest retired 2 years after I started, and Catherine Clore became cashier. And then I assumed the duties as assistant cashier. I worked full-time and some part-time because at that time Bill and I were increasing our family. And then Sandy, Wayne Scott Rouse, and I don't know if anyone remembers Miss Ida Mae Ryle. They were hired in those years as bookkeepers. Then during the next few, I don't know how many people here remember. I would assume that part of them would remember Dam 38. Dam 38 was built in 1922, I believe. There's some real good pictures that I think came off of NKY View. That was the construction, and it was quite a beautiful think, a site. We had, I don't know if any of you remembered having picnics there. It's just a beautiful place to be. And that was that was about half a mile west of Bellevue, Macville. And the dam closed in 1962. And that was sort of the beginning that the times in Bellevue and our economy started changing. Dam 38, the post office also closed. And also then at that time, Interstate 75 construction had started. And of course, the traffic on the Ohio had slowed down considerably. Before that time, Bellevue was a stop along the Ohio for riverboats. There were, I know Bill had family members that were pilots and captains of riverboats, and so things were good for quite a few years because of that. But that was all gone at this point, and just had slowed down a lot of things going on in this little river town, just as it had in Petersburg. Western Boone County was just in a slowdown, that's all. Farmers Bank in Petersburg were experiencing the same problem. And a group by the name of CDA was able to acquire 100% of the Farmers Bank and 50% of the Citizens Deposit Bank stock, with promises that they could grow the two banks. My father, Harold Rogers, was on the board at the time. He had kept his Citizens Deposit Bank stock. He was in Florida, and he got word that some questionable banking practices were taking place at Farmers Bank. And so he quickly returned to Boone County and to see what was going on and to see if the Citizens Deposit Bank had been affected. During this time, Mrs. Floor was experiencing some health problems, and so I took over her position of cashier. My father contacted an attorney in Covington that some of you all might recognize, named John R.S. Brookie. And at the time, it was a little different politically in the state of Kentucky. Louis B. Nunn was the governor of Kentucky, and Mr. Brookie had some connections with him, and my dad contacted him to help save the bank. And this was accomplished by securing new influential investors and moving the charter to Florence, Kentucky. And this is my piece about Citizens Deposit Bank. So Boone State is going to be, a little report on Boone State is going to be given by Dennis.
I used to think the pressure was when you knew that the bank examiners were going to come in, but the pressure is when you got your notes and you think you left them at home. So I stuck them in my overcoat instead of this boat, so I was sweating there for a little while. But, most of the things were up on the screen anyway, but I had made some notes on some of my papers here. But you know, some of the stuff it's been really interesting in going through this process. And I guess the older you get, the more historical you get a little bit. You forget a lot of things, but of course Sandy and Mary Sue have been a tremendous help in kind of completing all this information together. And also I want to thank Mr. Conrad in doing the PowerPoint presentation for us. So that was very helpful. You know, some of the things that you know that Mary Sue were talking about, I'm going to maybe repeat a little bit. But before I do that, I thought maybe we would show you how maybe banking has changed over the years. When I first came to the bank, of course I started my career with First National Bank of Covington in 1968. But this was a note that we were using at Boone State Bank, and it's a one page, about 8 by 5. As you can see, it has a place for the amount, the date, a promise to pay, and a place for the address, a place to put the due date, and a place for a signature. It doesn't even have an interest rate on it. Of course, back then, typically notes were discounted. You'd sign a note for $500, but you'd only get $450, but you pay back $500. So there really wasn't an interest rate even put on the note. But of course, if any of you had the experience of borrowing any money recently, you know that you probably worn out 3 ink pens signing all the papers and going through all the disclosures. I'm not sure it's made it any better, but it's I guess it's helped people in the paper business. So, but I thought that was pretty interesting to look at. But as Mary Sue said, the Farmers Bank in Petersburg was in bad shape, and because of some unsafe and unsound banking practices, they were actually closed by the FDIC. And because of the interlocking directors, as well on the Citizens Bank board, they were also in danger of being closed. And as she pointed out, Mr. Rogers, her father, had contacted John Brooking, a Covington attorney, to help try to save the bank. And through this process, he was able to secure some new investors. And I'm sure some of these people's names you'll recognize, but those that are listed up at the top: R.C. Durr, Gene Kelly, Ken Lucas, Ray Eskew, Ron Kroon, Cliff Robertson, Robert Maddox, Ralph Drees, Don Stith, John Crumpleman, Bill Burns, along with the 4 people that were on the existing board: Mr. Rogers, Colbert Hooten, Mary Sue, and then Catherine Clore, then made up the new board of directors for what was to be Boone State Bank. As Mary Sue pointed out, what kind of took place, or what happened, was kind of unheard of, because the banking laws at that time were, first of all, you couldn't branch outside your county, and you couldn't build a branch in a town where there was already a main office. And of course, Florence Deposit had their main office in Florence. So somehow, and through Mr. Brookings' contacts with the governor, the Department of Financial Institutions approved this, but they were able to not only acquire the bank, change the name to Boone State Bank, and relocate the main office to Florence, and then converting the branch down in Grant to in Bellevue as a branch. So that was quite an undertaking, and I'm sure that the connection between Mr. Brooking and the governor, of course, Governor Nunn was the first Republican governor since, I think, in 1947, I think, was the last Republican governor. So, it all kind of fell into place that allowed this to take place and relocate the main office to Florence. For several months, the bank operated out of a trailer. Those of you who were around probably remember that. It was in front of the what is now, well, not now the Ramada Inn, but it was the Ramada Inn back then. But they operated a trailer while they were building a new office there at the corner of 42 and Industrial Road. At that time, the bank began and had total assets of about $600,000. We have a photograph here of a couple photographs of the groundbreaking for the new office, and hopefully you can make those out. But the person on the far left, we don't know who that is, but it was the contractor that was building the building. The next person there is Mayor Ewing from the city of Florence. The next person is Ken Lucas, and then the person with the shovel is a guy named Vince Hills, and he was to be the president of the bank, but he didn't survive the opening. And then Mr. Rogers on the far right. Then on this next picture, it's a similar picture, but with a few more people added. You have Ken Lucas on the far left. He's standing next to Ben Courtney. And then Debbie Fisk and Bonnie Cross, which are two of the early employees of Boone State Bank, along with the mayor and, again, Vince Hills and Mr. Rogers for the groundbreaking. So, then I guess in July of '72 is when the new office was opened, and there was a big celebration, grand opening that you typically would do, and I'm sure, as you know, that location at the corner of 42 Industrial Road was quite a location as far as traffic and so forth, and served the bank very well for a number of years. At the time when the bank started, it was under the operation of supervision of Ben Courtney. At that time, the bank did not have a day-to-day president. The title of president was held by one of the directors at that time. Here's an older statement of condition that you can see. Again, the bank started with $600,000, and by December of 1971, it had grown to $1.4 million, and by April of '72, it had grown to $1.843 million. We have some other, there's the back of that financial statement, again listing some of the directors and the office location. I came to the bank in July of 1973. At that time, the bank assets were about $7.8 million. And as you can see from 1973 or 70s to 74, the bank had grown all the way to, I'm going to skip here, to $11,840,000. And it wasn't unusual for the bank to grow by 25 or 30% every year, which was good, but it also created some, some capital problems in that we had to issue more stock, and we did that a couple of different times in the early 70s to keep up with the growth. In fact, the bank was at one time one of the fastest growing bank, in the state. In July of 1973, the bank paid its first dividend of 25 cents per share. I think there's a letter here signed by Gene Kelly, who was serving had the title of president, and Ken Lucas, who was chairman of the executive committee. By the way, they paid the 25-cent dividend in July, but it had nothing to do with me coming to the bank. Though in this letter you can see that they were projecting, had a goal of reaching $8 million by the end of the year in '73, and they had also pointed out that they had not expected to be able to pay any dividends for several years, and but because of the growth and the profits that they were able to do this, go ahead and pay that dividend in 1973. In fact, like I said, not only did they exceed the $8 million goal, but they grew to over $9 million at the end of '73. And like I said, in 1974, they were $11,840,000. I guess, with that, I think there's some maybe comments to be made, and maybe why the bank was growing so rapidly. Number one, we had a great group of directors. We had directors that were involved in the community, and they promoted the bank all the time. They were excellent promoters of the bank. And unlike maybe in today's banking environment, maybe the directors have a different function, but our directors were very involved, and we had a great group of employees. Of course, Sandy and Mary Sue, we were like family, and the bank was a family. We have some things out here on the table that you might want to look at later. We had some great Christmas parties. Those were a lot of fun. But everybody knew each other. They worked hard, and of course back then, banking was about taking care of people, and not everybody had that same attitude. That they wanted to serve the customer, and I think that was why the bank was the success that it was. In 1975, the bank opened its third location in Terminal A of the Cincinnati International Airport. The airport was looking for a bank to locate there, and we decided to do that. And while there wasn't a lot of business to be had from that, it gave the bank a tremendous amount of exposure. New people coming into the area and traveling back and forth, they knew that they recognized the name and so forth. So the bank was, like I said, got some free exposure from that. In 1977, we opened our fourth office over on Mall Road. Of course, that bank, that office is now closed, but of course the mall was just been finished and opened up. But in addition to the freestanding facility that we had out on Mall Road, we also put a night depository inside the mall. The merchants, what we heard from them were that they didn't want their people carrying their night drop bags over to the bank, and if there was some way that they could stay inside. So we built a night depository inside the mall that they could make their night deposits there without ever leaving the facility. And I can remember during the holiday season that we had to empty that more than once. We would empty it, of course, every day, but we did it on Saturday morning, and then we'd have to go back on Sunday morning and empty it again to keep it from filling up so that people could continue to drop. Employees weren't real happy about working on Sunday mornings, but it was necessary. We kind of rotated and had a crew that would come in and get the night deposits in, bring them over to the main office, and process them so that it would free up the space for additional night drops. In 1981 is when I was named president of the bank. And like I said, up until that time, the title of president had been held by one of the directors. Again, things were changing a little bit, and felt that was maybe the way to go. The banking laws in Kentucky were kind of strange in the early years, and that not only did they not allow branching across county lines, but as I said, you couldn't build a branch where somebody else had a main office. But there was a movement on to change the laws in Kentucky that would allow banks to acquire other banks through holding companies. And when this was done, it would allow you to acquire another bank in another county, but you had to operate it under a separate charter. You couldn't merge the two banks together. You had to operate a separate bank. And it was during this time, in the mid-'80s, that there were a number of acquisitions that had taken place in northern Kentucky. The Huntington Bank out of Cincinnati bought Covington Trust, and Fifth Third Bank had purchased American National Bank over at Newport. But again, they had to operate those as separate charters, even though the bank in Ohio owned them. Also, the First National Bank of Cincinnati at that time, as it was known, purchased the Citizens Bank in Campbell County. Of course, as you know, that Of course, the law has changed since then, but it was also during this time, of course, the bank had grown to about $100 million in total size, and we had outgrown our main office, and we began looking for a new location for our main office. And at that time, we identified the site over at the corner of Houston Road and 18. And here's a photo, an artist rendering of that location, which you know now as today as a Fifth Third location. But that was quite an undertaking for our bank at that time. It was during the 80s and 1986 that we were being pursued, as an acquisition by both Huntington and Fifth Third. In fact, as one of the things that I was impressed by during this process is that, because I had never flown on a Learjet, but Huntington Bank sent a Learjet down here to the airport. And Mr. Gurr and myself and Bob Zapp all got on a plane and flew us up to Columbus and took us up on the 50th floor of their building and tried to convince us to go with them. But for a lot of different reasons, we felt that Fifth Third was a better fit for us, and I think that was turned out to be accurate. But after several months of negotiations, the bank was sold then to Fifth Third. And like I said, at that time, we were well over $100 million. And the acquisition actually occurred while we were under construction with the new main office. So Fifth Third was aware of it and was on board with that. And many of you probably remember that Johnny Bench was a spokesman for Fifth Third at that time, and was for a number of years. So we were able to get Bench over for our grand opening at the 18 location. So he was quite a hit, needless to say, signing autographs and people getting to meet him. Of course, after the bank was sold, it was operated as the Fifth Third Bank of Boone County until 1990, when again banking laws were changed that allowed them to merge banks together across county lines. So in 1990, they merged they had made three acquisitions in northern Kentucky. They acquired, like I said, American National Bank in Campbell County. They acquired the old Security Bank in Kent County, and Boone State in Boone County. And so after those laws were changed, they were allowed to merge those three banks together as one bank. Of course, now, you don't even have to have a charter in Kentucky. The charter can be wherever, and these are all operated as branches. But like I said, this has been kind of fun going back and looking at some of the pictures and some of the history, and remembering some of the things that took place and some of the people. And it was a great time. So, like I said, if anybody has any questions, I'd be glad to try to answer anything. And like I said, there's some other material up here that you might want to take a look at. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Do you know what the questionable practices of the farmers?
Yes, they were doing brokered loans and brokered deposits. Which is something that's always been frowned upon in banking. In other words, they were taking large deposits from all over the country and doing the same thing with loans. Rather than lending it out locally to local people you could do, they were lending it to wherever they could put it, really.
Thank you.
All right, thank you all very much.